one of the things very first episode, the very first season, the very first episode, they had the contestants had pretending to be superheroes, and they had to, like, I don't know, run to a certain location in a certain amount of time. But along the way, oh man, that picture is just too dark. It's not going to work very well. There was they planted, and this was the real test, a little girl at a fountain in the middle of the public as they're running by that was crying because she had lost her mom. And it was hilarious to watch superheroes just run right by her as she's crying. This one didn't. You don't see it very well. You know, he did, and he helped the little girl. But because that was the real test, right? And in many ways, I think that exemplifies how you and I can end up operating in life. In that we claim we have a certain set of priorities, and specifically this idea of I'm going to put God first in my life. That primary for me is to have God first, and yet I end up wondering if we get caught up in the busyness and the muchness of trying to reach individual goals, that we end up missing it. You know, I remember as a young kid, I had just started going to youth group. I hadn't been for very long, that kind of stuff. And I remember hearing about this idea of placing God first. And so I decided as a middle schooler that I was going to quiz my parents about what was first in their life. And they didn't answer the way I liked, and it became a consternation. So but I'm going to do the same thing to you. Let's do a little pop quiz. Let me ask you about the idea of God being first in your life. And so the first of the question, the pop quiz, you know, the blanks in your outline, is God at the center of my family? For those of you who have kids, do your kids know that as far as like being in church, being people of prayer, being people that look to Scripture for reading, do they know that this is just who we are, this is what we do? It doesn't necessarily mean that they are necessarily going to follow when they're older, but do they just know, like, yeah, that's my upbringing. This is what's important to my family, to my parents. Do you know that of each other? Does your spouse understand that? Do you understand? Is it central in the life of your family? I've shared this example a number of times, but it amazes me at the boldness of the response. I told you that Luke had qualified to be in a more competitive recreational soccer thing, and yet a lot of the games were played on the weekends, including Sunday mornings. And when he had qualified, and before we signed him up, I called to talk to some of the coaches, and I said, look, this isn't who we are, and Sunday morning is just not going to be an option. We'll certainly participate on Saturdays. We can even participate later Sunday afternoon and that kind of stuff. Sunday morning is just not going to be an option for us. And I had a couple calls out, and eventually the head coach called and said, oh, yeah, no problem. He says, interestingly enough, most kids are only wanting to show up at the games versus the practices. If he's there all the practices and has to skip out on the occasional Sunday morning game, we're fine with that. But before I could talk to him, I talked to yet another coach who said, yeah, you know what, we can't do that. And he says, you know, I understand the impulse. I grew up Catholic, but soccer's my religion now. And I was amazed that he was willing to say that. So clearly there are some folks who's like, no, I have other gods on a weekend besides God, and that may be soccer, they may be whatever. But the question is, so when it comes to your family and your family life, do they know? Does your family generally get this is who we are, or at least this is who you are? Secondly, at work, is God first in your place of employment? Now, I often hear people balk at that a little bit, like, well, you know, my work environment, I work with, you know, in a government agency, or there are certain things that I can and can't talk about on public. And it's like, no, I get that. What I'm really asking is, as far as your work is concerned, are you doing your work in the way that would please God? Are you working as a Christian would work, with integrity, with forthrightness, to show and the values of what it means to follow Jesus in the middle of a workplace? I remember a story. You're hearing this third hand, but somebody I knew who owned his own business, and he was interacting with another business owner that he had been to church with, and that guy, he was heavily involved in his church. And he made a deal with this other guy and to do something that was a little, well, it was illegal. It was a little suspicious. I don't know if it's actually illegal, but it was definitely shady. And he says, hold on. Like, at church, you're a church-going man. You say you follow God, but then you have this. And the guy's response, this is what I really remember, the one detail I do really remember of the story, when he said, yeah, that's church. This is business. That would be the opposite of the idea of God being first in your work. Next, how about your social, relational? And by that, I definitely mean relational, like how do you interact with people? How do you care for others? How do you interact? But I know we live in a world that is much more isolated right now, and we do a lot of things alone. Would you be comfortable with Jesus watching the things you watch when you're doing it? Would you be doing the things that you're doing, like that kind of stuff? But I'm really thinking a lot about the relational piece and the interactions we have. I know a lady who is deliberately with people who serve her, whether it's wait staff or people in a doctor's office, she is deliberately mean to them. She tries to yell and is condescending and demanding. And when confronted, it's like, why do you do this? She says, well, because I feel I get help a lot quicker when I do this. And it seems to me that would be the opposite of putting Christ first in our interactions and relationships, because you're more interested in being served and getting your agenda done than caring about the people around you. So as you think in terms of your life, your family life, your work life, your social life, whatever other pieces there might be, how are you doing? I guess what I'm really trying to get at is, where are your priorities? If maybe another way is this. Let's pretend, I think we're a far way off. I don't mean to be conspiratorial, but let's imagine if in the United States it was illegal to be a Christian. If it was illegal to put God first in your life. Would somebody be able to look at your life and have enough evidence to convict you? Or would you be able to slide under the radar and know that, no, it'd be pretty easy to hide the fact that I put God first in my life? I think the reality is probably a little bit different. And that there probably are some areas in our lives where we claim that God is first, but it has difficulty showing up. Whether it's how we interact with other people or at work or family or whatever. And so what we're going to do over the next 3 weeks, we're going to continue our series in the Old Testament. We're going to be looking at 3 specific passages in 1 Kings and a couple of others that really relate to the idea of worship. Because honestly, if you've got this distance between who you are and what you profess that God is first in your life and what you're experiencing, it's worship that gets us there. Worship that gets us to the place of reminding ourselves, of focusing our attention, of turning over to God who we are and saying He is God and we are not. Ultimately, at every level, that's what worship is. It's crying the worthiness of God, that He's God and we're not. And, well, let me start off with it. So your assignment this week is to read 1 Kings 8. If you haven't done so, to certainly read that, if that catches a glimpse in what is happening in 1 Kings 8. Solomon, for those of you who've been following along in our series up to this point, Solomon is the son of David. He is the second king of Israel. I mean, I guess he's really third, but if I consider Saul the hiccup. David as the main king, Solomon his son, who is doing, and Solomon, though David wanted to do this, Solomon actually, it was under his kingship that the temple was built in Jerusalem. The high temple to where God would be, where the ark would be put and kept, Solomon built this. And David wanted to, but because of his history of violence and war, some of which was literally commanded by God, he was not allowed to do that. But he put up a whole bunch of stuff. He got all the gold for all the gold stuff and got all the silver so that when Solomon came up, he had it all ready and could just do it. And so this is the story of what's going on there. But what's interesting to me, and where I want to focus this morning, is on the worship aspect. Now, when I'm talking about worship, I want to be clear. You can and should be worshiping God on your own. That there are times when you're alone and there are times of the day that you should be doing that. But most of what I'm going to be talking about is literally what was happening for Solomon, that they were doing this as a community, as a gathering, as a group, and what it meant for them to do it together. I realize how radical that is, this idea of worship being corporate. I had an experience not too long ago. I was at the bedside of somebody who was extremely ill and dying, and I had some family members that had come in, and I was talking with them, and they explained to me, that they were believers, but they didn't really go to church. And the guy said something I've heard a zillion times, where he said, I feel closer to God. Not as much in a church service, but if I'm outdoors and in a stream and fishing and rocks and trees and wind, I sense God way more than I ever do in a church service. And God, you'll be proud of me. I kept my mouth shut. I didn't say what I really wanted to say, because I'm like, we have this literal example right in front of us. When you're laying here in the hospital, which rock is going to show up for you? Which tree is going to be praying for you? Which mountain is going to try to be there as you recover? Which of this? You have chosen this idea of isolation, and it's so common for our culture. We are more isolated, more alone, more disconnected from people around us. And I get it, and you've turned to spiritualize it, go, I'm really more holy because I don't bother with other people. So this idea that Solomon is doing this in corporate is powerful, because what we're going to see is what he's doing is he's bringing this temple and putting it here. Here we are in 1 Kings 8. This is near the end, 65, 66. Solomon observed the festival at that time, and all Israel with him, a vast assembly, people from Lebo Hamath to the Wadi of Egypt. They celebrated before the Lord our God for 7 days, and 7 days more, 14 days in all, and on the following day he sent the people away. They blessed the king and then went home, joyful and glad in heart, for all the good things the Lord had done for his servant David and his people Israel. Wouldn't you long for that? To be able to have this corporate gathering, a great assembly shows people gather together and partially because of that, able to go home joyful and glad. This interplay of this time, our worship together, has an impact into a lot of life. And worship can get us there. But if we really want this kind of worship, if we really long for that, we're gonna have to fight some things. We're gonna have to fight some parts of culture that is. We're gonna have to fight, because Solomon was fighting. He's like, we are going to make God first in this nation. He is going to be at the capital. We're going to have the temple there. It's going to be first in who we are and what we do, and worship is the key to get there. So I want to just share a couple of things that I think would be really helpful for you and I to focus on if we really want a corporate worship that's going to lead us towards better putting God first in our life. Now, before I do this, I feel like I'm going to take a small little tangent. It used to be very common, and I remember doing this a number of years ago, where, you'd try to do sermons and have a lot of little alliteration or make it rhyme or do little things like that. And I've pretty much jettisoned that. I'm like, it's a lot of work. I don't think the rest of you care, and it seems a little hokey. But by coincidence today, all of these start with C. And it really is a coincidence. I didn't try to do it. It just happened. And I was going to go, I'm like, I should change it. I should change it so it isn't. But then I'm like, okay, that's ridiculous. I'm spending time trying to avoid the word. So just the fact that it's a bunch of C's, it's okay. All right? Just don't judge me. All right. The first thing we're going to need to fight to really get into the idea of worship that we can be glad and joyful, that leads us to help putting God in our place, is to not consumer but costly. Not consumerism, but costly worship. That it isn't about being a consumer, right? We've talked about this a little bit before, this idea of consumerism. And consumerism, I want to be very clear. I don't think consumerism by itself is necessarily bad. In some places, it makes a lot of sense, and we should do it. For those of you who don't know, and they have not paid me for this, but I go to Panera a lot because they have this little thing that's called a sip club, and you pay this amount, and every 2 hours you can go get another drink. Every 2 hours during the day, and so I pay this monthly amount, and I go there. I stopped there this morning, and I got a coffee, and I will probably stop along the way, and on the way back home, and get a Diet Pepsi or something. And then I do this all the time, and it drives my wife nuts. She's like, "Do you feel like you have to go there like all the time?" And I'm like, "I get to go there. Like I walk in, and they give me a drink." Every time. I just like, "Hey, I want that." And they're like, "You can have it." And I am so excited. And what I do is I actually find out, like I try to get there a little bit more and to find out how much am I actually paying per drink. And I've got it somewhere under 21 cents a drink. Like I am like doing this. And I'm excited. Now, so it's a good thing. And we do that sometimes. Like we're shopping for the best deals. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't have a problem, but the problem comes when we treat other parts of our life that way. And I think we can certainly do that with church, except we're really smart and we spiritualize it. We don't just sit there and say, I'm trying to get as much out of church as possible and offering as little as I can. I'm trying to barely show up and barely serve and barely give in, but get as much. And to increase that consumer value, I'm getting at least 21 cents per unit of worship. We somehow get that idea, and then we spiritualize. We say, well, I'm not being fed, or I'm not feeling it. Or do I really like it? We can do these kind of spiritual things, but let me give it probably an example that might hit a little bit better. And that is, what if we tried to consumerize our relationships? Like I'm a little concerned because I think that's happening. I see a lot of dating advice. I see a lot of stuff on social media that is very much about trying to consumerize of like, are you receiving all that you're putting in? I mean, you're doing this and this. Are you getting enough from this person? What have they done for you lately? And this kind of advice and I think you and I get this. If our relationships were like that, where we're constantly measuring, am I getting enough value for everything I put into this relationship? How horrible that relationship would be, that transactional value of relationship. Well, as a contrast, I want to talk a little bit about how it can be costly. That good relationships, can be really costly. And one of my favorite examples is Robert McQuillan. Now, you probably don't know him. He was president of, Columbia Bible College and Seminary for like 22 years. And in 1990 is when he resigned. So he had been there since, the 70s, the 60s, I guess. That president of this college, and he resigned because his wife got Alzheimer's. Matter of fact, the story was that when she first got it, she would follow him to work, and he would walk with her from the house to there, and she would walk with him each day, sometimes 10 trips a day, just because he was familiar, he was okay, and she felt comfortable there, and did that day in and day out, until one day when he was, putting her to bed and took her shoes off, whatever, her feet were bloody from the walk. And he's just like, I can't anymore. And so he resigned. He resigned from being the president. And it was very clear, like the seminary said, we need you. And he realized the seminary did need him, but so did Muriel, his wife. And so he resigned to take care of her. And he did so till the end of her life. But I love his quote when asked the question about why he did it. He says, "It's clear to me that Muriel needs me now, full time. And my decision was made in a way 42 years ago when I promised to care for Muriel in sickness and in health, till death do us part. So as a man of my word, integrity has something to do with it. But so does fairness. She has cared for me fully and sacrificially all these years. If I cared for her for the next 40 years, I would not be out of her debt. He paid a price to live up, to care for his wife. He's not measuring, despite this whole idea of, I'm in debt. It's just because he knows he has a relationship with this woman, and everything else, all his career was secondary. And if you're like me, you're like, yes, that's the way it should be. Is that the way it is in our relationship with God? Does our worship cost us something? I mean, it certainly did for here in 1 Kings. The king and all Israel with him offered sacrifices before the Lord. Solomon offered a sacrifice of fellowship offerings to the Lord, 22,000 cattle, 120,000 sheep and goats. So the king and all Israel dedicated the temple of the Lord, that they were willing to sacrifice. This whole sacrificial system, we've talked about it before, how the sacrifices were a shadow of ultimately the sacrifice that Jesus made for us. That it was helping us understand that and set us up for that sacrifice. But do you ever think about why Jesus was willing to sacrifice for you and I? He just wanted to be with us. It wasn't about measuring. It wasn't about like, hey, of all the stuff they've done for me, it's about time I did something for them. He was like, no. This is so important to me, and they're so important to me. I am willing to sacrifice pain and death and separation for the sake of being able to be with them, to forgive their sins so that we could be together here and for eternity. And so it's going to cost us something. Now, not literally. I mean, we're not charging to have people walk in and be here, but I mean, there are some costs in just showing up. I think about Rachel and Judah showing up early, and they have to get up early and come and be here for no other reason than just to serve the rest of us. They show up early, and that's matched by the rest of the worship team, who says, we're willing to be here, we want to practice, we want to offer what we can to the congregation so that we can worship together, that it costs something. It's not the cost. Really, it's not just a measure of how much did you spend to show up to worship today. It's really, I think, an issue of value. That maybe the better question is, what would it take to convince you not to be here next Sunday? I think for the consumer, it would be, well, do I have something else going on? Do I, what else might be happening? Should we really go if we're not too busy, if I'm not too tired? I've been trying for a while now to, I'll get there in a second. But the issue is whether or not it's worth it. Another way to put it, and the next one, is it's not about convenience but consistency. You see, when I thinking about this point, I have my son's words ringing in my head, and I don't know if they're original to him, but been trying to exercise on a regular basis. I've got this thing of 5 days a week. I'm just going to do this. And as I was trying, and I'm trying to get into the pattern, I remember talking to Luke when he was I say, hey, I need to go to the gym. I'm just not very motivated. And he says to me, Dad, discipline beats motivation every day. And I'm like, shut up, kid. Because he's right? That there's something, motivation means, do I feel it? Do I feel like it? Is it good? Do I want to? Is there something else that I'd rather do? I'd rather sleep in, or I'd rather not do. But that I'm just going to show up anyway. Discipline, like I said, it's probably not, might not be his original words. But in a convenient world, I would ask myself, hey, should I go to church tomorrow? Should I try to worship? Should I be engaged? Should I bother going? Versus a consistent world which says, I just do it. When I am trying to add exercise into my life, and I have all kinds of barriers. I don't feel like it. It's raining outside. I'm tired. I've got other people I want to hang out with. There's all these reasons. And I've got tons of reasons. But it really comes down to, I don't want to. but I need it. So, interestingly enough, this temple dedication happened during a ongoing festival called the Feast of Booths. This was this annual festival, and if you know anything about ancient Judaism, I mean, it was just ripe with rituals and festivals and times of the calendar. We do this at this time, we do it for so many days, and we have this ritual daily and with this weekly, over and over. And the early Quakers had a problem with rituals because they felt like people would sometimes do the rituals and not really have any depth to it, and so they shied away from it. But the thing is what they did do in their world was still create consistency and discipline in their spiritual walk. Here's the reference. The king of Solomon summoned into his presence at Jerusalem the elders of tribes and all the heads of the tribes and the chief of the Israelite families to bring up the ark of the Lord covenant from Zion in the city of David. Now, just to be clear, when he's talking about elders and the heads of the tribes, the chiefs of the different areas, you've got Judah and Benjamin and Reuben, all these areas, these people are traveling. They're traveling to get there. This isn't convenient for them. They're willing to show up. And they show up from whatever distance, and they're there. And all the Israelites came together to King Solomon at the time of the festival. That's the Festival of Booths, in the month of Etham in the 7th month. So this idea that they just say, this is what we do, and we're going to be consistent with it. I don't know. No, let me step back a bit. Let me just own this idea that it can be that the idea of being here week to week, the idea of worshiping folks with folks in this room, that we gather, that kind of stuff. And you might say, but what if I don't like it? What if I'm not feeling it? That preacher's really dumb. Like, what if we're in that space and we're in that? We will talk about that over the next couple weeks. We're like I said, we're going to hit this idea of worship. We're going to hit some other stories. We're going to talk about Elijah. We're going to talk about the temple again, and we're going to see some of those over the next couple weeks. And so I will want to address some of that. But in many ways, I feel like this should be a gut check for us. A gut check for me. What is it? Is this life? Is it part of my lifestyle? Am I willing to be disciplined and consistent and pay the cost to show up, to be in the gathering? Do you realize the word church literally means the gathering? And so as we gather, can we gather together to worship, to say, I will put God first in my week, and then show how and see how that infiltrates to family and work and stuff if I'm just consistently, regularly, costly, not worried about, is it nice, is it convenient, am I willing to show? What's putting God first worth in your life? Let's pray. Okay, Lord, I don't want to overpress this. The truth is having you first in our life is way more than just showing up to church. Like that's not. We can fake it. I think people have for generations, centuries maybe, that just willing to show up and go along, and their hearts are not necessarily changed. And so, Lord, I don't want to pretend that. But on the other hand, I'm haunted by a devotional I read years and years ago. My Heart, Christ's Home, where it gives this picture that I've invited you into my life. And I said, I want to be where you are. And it has this image of you showing up every day in the living room, willing to meet with me. And maybe I show up too initially, and I enjoy that time, but things get busy, and I've got other things to do, and I've got places to go, and one day I begin to rush out, and I see you sitting there and realize you've been there every day. So Lord, I do believe that you are calling us weekly to gather together, that you say, come, hang out with me together with these other people that I adore and that I love. Yeah, they've got some rough edges, but that's really what you need. So Lord, I'm going to pray for a few things for myself. One, just that ongoing desire and consistency. Well, not motivation, but just discipline to say, I choose you. I want to be here. I want to be with your people. I want to worship you. So I do pray for that. But Lord, I pray for the depth, that it's not enough to just show I want a changed heart. I want you to infiltrate my family and my work and my relationships and the things that I do. And if this is what it takes to get there, Lord, I choose you. I choose to worship you. I choose to do that with other flawed, messed up people and say, let's figure it out together. And I love because you first loved me. Thank you for your willingness to show up and not really count the cost, but just pay the cost so that you and I could be together. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, let's have a few moments of open worship. If God put something on your heart, feel free to share it. I'll close this in a couple minutes.